Sir, we welcome you for this session, and we are eagerly waiting because I belong to a computer science field. I'm eagerly waiting what kind of laws you are going to tell us, how I can explain these things to my students also.
Definitely.
We welcome for this session, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your invite. So to start with the session right away, I believe there are a total of how many audience as of now? 70 participants as of now. So are we expecting any more, or how does it work, ma'am?
They'll be joining.
Yes, sir. They'll be joining us, sir.
Okay, perfect. Fine, ma'am. That be the case. Let me start with a very, how do I put it, very devastating news that Indian law by default doesn't have any law related to cybercrime in general. So whatever law right now we have is basically a modified version of existing laws to cater the need of cybercrime. So the basic definition is many people have a misconception that the Information Technology Act of 2008 amendment or 2000, the default act, covers the provisions of cybercrime. But unfortunately, that is not the case. The main purpose to which the cybercrime was, the Information Technology Act by itself was brought was to cater the need of e-commerce industry, matters pertaining to digital signature, matters pertaining to how the rules and laws should be framed with regard to the functioning of e-commerce portals and websites and services. So that being the case, do we have a special law for cyber law or cyber crime? No, there is not. But what is the alternative measures? There are three predominant rule frameworks that are being used in our day-to-day judicial system. See, people have a misconception that there is only one act, one law, or two law, three law. But actually, there are more than 22,000 laws in India alone. So even for a lawyer to learn all the 22,000 laws it's practically impossible. So it's like basically going to an engineering student and saying, you don't just have to pass in the 20th subject, you also need to pass 20,000 more subjects. So that is the analogy that I would give. So what happens is, with regard to cybercrime in general, since there is no special law enacted as on date, whatever law is in force, I have told about three main laws. One law is Indian Penal Code, which deals with the punishment that has to be provided for each and every crime that is being put in a generic manner. Second is CRPC, Criminal Procedure Code. It talks about what is a criminal procedure, how the criminal court should function, and a judge cannot do anything out of his own ordinary will and wish. He has to follow the procedures as laid down in the CRPC book. Then there is CPC, that is the Civil Procedure Code. So a Civil Procedure Code is all about how civil cases should function. So does cyber law or cyber crime come into civil or criminal? The answer is purely retrospective. It is purely based upon the nature of incident that is happening that we have to decide whether it is a civil remedy that we have to seek or a criminal remedy that we have to seek. So without further ado, let me just move into the session right away. So we are going to talk about the law, cyber law in general, and the facts of reporting. I'm sure yesterday's session was enlightening for many of the attendees over here. You would have already heard about all these top generic crimes that are happening in day-to-day life. So even if they might have missed, maybe I can give you a short recap. So morphing of images is a very common crime that is happening these days. There are many artificial intelligence based tools that are available on the internet. For example, yesterday, even there was an article in The Hindu stating that there's an artificial intelligence website called as new.ai or whatever it is. So whenever you upload any normal photo, it converts it into a new photo. So that itself is a morphing boon for people who want to deface you. So morphing by default has to be a criminal intent, wherein the person has to have your photo. He has to go and get a Photoshop application, or should find a system that has a Photoshop. He has to manually select the areas that needs to be morphed and do the morphing. So there are several level of activities that has to be done in order for the crime to get committed. But now, with the help of artificial intelligence tools, whichever I told you about, it has basically become just like ordering in Zomato. Just to upload an image and you get a new version of it. So this is an alarming matter. Why? Point number one, the crime is happening at a larger rate. Number two, there is no evidence or digital footprint that is available in an ample manner to tackle or find who is the culprit who has done that. So that is with regard to morphing. Then you have creep shots, hidden shots that is happening across many hotels. Let's not pull out a brand, whatever it is. There are many people who put it on a, let's say, just like how there is a website for food ordering, there is a app for booking hotels. Even they place hidden cameras and creep cameras over there. Then whatever conversations you have, they take screenshots and post it online. Then you have financial frauds that are happening on a day-to-day basis, which we'll discuss even more at a later point of time. Then right now, the hot shot of the entire year, this financial year, would be WhatsApp sexting scam that is happening at an alarming rate, wherein most of the victims in this is 99% men. So you, being a women college, you are completely ruled out from this particular scam. So next you have matrimonial scam, to which also men are always the target and women are not the targets. Then you have OTP scams, which is the general neuter. It happens on a day-to-day basis. I hope people would have covered about it. If at all it has not been covered, please do let me know at the time of the Q&A. I'll be able to talk in detail about it. So as we all know, data is the new oil, and we all are already fumigating over the fact that oil prices are going up and petrol has already crossed 100 and 105 and everything. So data is even more costlier, to be very frank. So to prove you a point that data is the new oil, there is a scarcity of storage of space as of now in the general arena when it comes to data storage and everything. So Google, who was like the tech giant who would randomly give away free stuffs to all the users and everything, who was giving unlimited storage data for Google Photos and everything, even they happen to make this mantra a reality and say that no more free photos, you have to convert yourself to a paid member because we are running out of storage. So one of the famous quotes that I would like to recall here is, the only way to protect the data is not to collect it in the first place. So many crimes that are happening in default is basically because of residue of data that is available in the open, be it a personal photograph, be it a public post that we are making, or be it any activity that we do online that is getting into the nooks and crannies, and it is falling through the cracks. So we need to be very cautious that the data is not being collected in the first place. That is more than sufficient. So what are the challenges with regard to cyber law in general? See, whenever I mean the word cyber law, I do not specifically mean it as a law. I mean the applicability of cyber law in different aspects of CRPC, IPC, CPC, and all other existing laws that is available. One thing is possibility of crime. Possibility of crime is an alarming matter right now. We will talk about the stages of a crime in a couple of minutes. Then you will know the possibility of crime and the significance of it. Then logging of information has become a huge matter of question, wherein if a person breaks into a house, there are multiple information a police or a forensic expert can gain out of the particular information. The chain would have been broke open. He would have brought a cutter. The place in which he would have obtained the cutter, that is the place of gathering information. Then he would have cut the chain. Then for the purpose of cutting, he should have come and had a let's say preview of the place at least 2 or 3 times. He would have done a rendezvous multiple times before doing the particular crime. Then whenever he opens it, there will be fingerprint. Then he breaks open, then a crime actually is getting committed. So these are all information that happens on a day-to-day basis with regard to a physical crime. With regard to cyber crime, are there any much of logging on information that is happening? There was a scenario wherein multiple things were happening in the form of a logging, but now due to the new GDPR rules and regulations of Europe and everything, multiple cookie functionalities have been disabled or crumpled to the level that we are not allowed to be in the sense, I mean, the service providers are not allowed to record many of the information pertaining to a user in the pretext of privacy. So privacy versus security is also another huge tug of war that is happening on a daily basis right now. Then liability of the company to produce an evidence. Let's say that in this particular instance, let it be Facebook or Google, they have a liability to produce any information pertaining to the particular act. So Google or Facebook is just like your mobile phone, wherein you might have 128 GB, but your operatable memory will be only 115 GB. In that, if you use for 60 GB photos and another 60 GB personal content, you have hardly 10 GB for your actual day-to-day usage, whatever is required with regard to files and formats. So what happens is, even they have file constraint or a storage constraint, wherein they will not be able to hold on a particular data for more period of time, let's say 2 months or 3 months. Even they do have to format their systems, get rid of unused, unrequired system log files that is required. Then there is also technical limitation. One is cost factor. The next is technical limitation. Let's say that there was a system that was being hacked, but the system was already clean wiped using, let's say, any data shredder software. Then if a clean bit software was used, then technically you will not be able to acquire any data from the already wiped out system. So that is also becomes a huge constraint or a limitation in a technical perspective. Then you have LEA access and authorization. LEA is nothing but law enforcement agency. That is a generic name that is used globally. In India, we call it as a police or a authority. That is what we say it. So what is a crime in general? It is an act or omission which constitutes an offense and it is punishable by law. That is a very clean textbook definition of crime. So any act that has been done which constitutes an offense. Offense is provided under the provisions of Indian Penal Code. So Indian Penal Code has like 566 sections in which it will talk about these are the number of types of crimes that are available, and each crime, these are the punishments to be given. These punishments might be either in the form of sanctions. So sanctions are basically divided into two types. One is pecuniary sanction, that is money. You have to compensate or pay a penalty of its rate. Second is they call it as in the form of arrest or punishment by jail and everything. Then you have that is a different topic, wherein rigorous imprisonment is there, simple imprisonment is there, wherein a person will be given an opportunity to rehabilitate himself from the crime that he has committed. So the legal status of the crime is basically two categories. One is mens rea, second is actus reus. Mens rea is nothing but you need to have a thought. Mens rea is mens means people, rea means a thought. So basically men need to have a thought of a particular activity. He should have a guilty mind to commit a particular incident. So how do I put it? You're going in a two-wheeler, there's a stranger crossing the road, and if you clearly have an intent that I should kill this particular bugger because he's not giving proper marks or whatever it is, then if you have that guilty mind and do that activity, and at the later point of time when the crime is being investigated, when mens rea is being found, then you are punishable in everything. On the other hand, let's say that you're going on a bike on a normal speed and everything, but the person just jaywalked. He was no way to be around in that particular region, but he just jumped in the front of the vehicle, just like how a deer went in front of Salman Khan or whatever it is. So what basically happens is there's no guilty mind in this particular matter. So what happens? You did not intend to get that particular guy or the deer killed. So eventually mens rea doesn't exist, and the level of punishment will be obviously less. So mens rea is again categorized into intention. What is the motive? What is the knowledge you have about the particular incident? What is the recklessness? What is the negligence? So if I can explain this, I can even talk for a day, but let me cut short it over there. Actus reus is again guilty act. So it is not just about thinking, but doing that act. So you might think that, I don't like my faculty, I need to get rid of her. That is a guilty mind altogether. But whether are you doing any activity for that particular matter really matters. So actus reus is a very important concept or a pre-requirement with regard to execution of crime. So actual stages of crime, there is an intention, there's a preparation. Third thing is there is an attempt. Fourth stage is accomplishment. Yeah. So what you basically do is, first you have to prepare for doing the particular crime. Then you have to prepare. Let's say that you go and buy a knife from Walmart, or I mean not Walmart over here. I mean, let's say that you have what shops like yeah, wherever you go, you get a particular tool or a knife, and it might be a kitchen knife or even a big havoc. But whatever it is, if you are buying any instrument with the intent of causing any harm, then that is a form of preparation. Third is attempt. Are you concealing it and taking it into your college, or concealing it and trying to take it somewhere which is prohibited? Fourth stage is, are you really accomplishing and taking and slitting that throat? So that is the 4 actual stages that has to be completed for a crime to get committed. So let us take this particular analogy directly to internet. So in internet, let's talk the concept of a fake profile. So intention of the first is, let's say the intention over here is, I proposed to her, she did not accept my love. I need to make sure that her name is being spoiled. So that is the intention. That is stage number 1. Stage number 2 is preparation. What I'm going to prepare, I'm going to take a photo, I'm going to take a personal pictures, I'm going to find out all her contacts and do anything. Third thing is attempt. I really create a fake profile on Instagram, put a profile picture, put her personal photos, send a request to all her friends and circle and whatever it is. This is the step where the line is being crossed. And fourth step is whether you have actually accomplished with the fact of hurting her or whatever it is. So that is the 4 stages. So when I say over here, I talk from a perspective of an accused. I don't mean to say that I'm going to do it. So whatever it is. So one of the major issues, as I was talking before, logging of information has become a key concept of debate with regard to privacy versus security in general. The reason being, on one hand, the European Union has come up with the GDPR. India has is in the process of draft. There is a bill. It has not become an act altogether. Then there is data protection and privacy bill that is on the tables right now, and I don't think that bill is going to get passed in as soon as possible. Seeing the way the Speaker of the House was crying yesterday, it's in a pathetic state. So these laws, there are laws that protect end users in general from revealing their identity to companies or hosters of the particular website. And on the other hand, there is a requirement that LEA needs to capture as much as data possible from an end user, considering the fact that out of the 100, there will be at least 2 persons who are accused. So the law in general, basically, whether it is India or in US, it basically translates that no person who is an innocent should ever be treated as an accused or should be given a punishment. So unless and until a person is proved guilty, he will not be called as the felon or the person who has committed the crime. He'll be called only as an accused who is being accused of doing an activity. So it is not that he's being confirmed as a criminal, he's just being accused of doing a particular activity. Then you have the concept of right protection of privileged access. So basically what happens is there is a concept right now, issue going on right now, whether Facebook has the authority to deal with their own trouble. So when trouble in the sense, when a user posts a content that is objectable by law, and when Facebook does not remove that particular content, then it becomes a question whether it is the accused who is doing the criminal activity or Facebook that is harboring that particular criminal activity. So when there is a right protection from privileged access, only Facebook can do or remove this particular content on their own will and wish. So it is up to them whether they comply with the legal provisions of the law or anything. So even the hot topic of the month was whether Google was going to appoint a nodal person in India and ensure that they comply with the new provisions of data privacy bill. But whereas as per the provisions of the amended Information Technology Act, but even they have been filing cases in Supreme Court and saying that we are not a service provider, but we are basically just a search engine. So it's a legal battle that is going on, but at the end of the day, Google has to comply with all those provisions, wherein even though Facebook, Google, and all these giants have the right protection of the privileged access, law enforcement agency will be given some form of credentials wherein they will be able to take down the content without the consent of Facebook. So cyber law in general in today's world, it is being categorized in many acts of let's say Information Technology Act. You have the concept of cyber laws. Tampering with the computer source comes under 65 of Information Technology Act. When I say tampering of computer source document, let's take an example of a question paper created by your faculty. Now, your faculty has already created a question paper, but let's say that you just want to change one question without her consent. You go into her office, you open the computer and just change one question, which is a very complicated question, to a simple question. Then that is a tampering of a computer source document. So any document that resides within the computer, you do it with the purpose of getting a wrongful gain, then it comes under 65 of IT Act. Then hacking of computer systems and data alterations. So computer systems in general is basically like you are removing the hard disk, you are removing a RAM, or you're trying to download a particular file, or you're trying to edit a particular file with the intention of creating any harmful act to the other person. Then it comes under the provision of 66 Information Technology Act. Then you have the concept of 66B, wherein if you have received stolen devices. Let's say that you go to any shop in Hyderabad, any particular mall which is selling you an iPhone for 10,000 rupees, but the only thing is it would be either deactivated or it would be a stolen device, but you knowingly or unknowingly buy the product, then you are liable for the punishment under 66B. So basically what happens is, whether you know that it is stolen or not, you are liable for punishment. So whenever you buy a product, make sure that even if it is a second hand, you buy it only with the help of a bill, and don't buy without the bill. Then you have identity theft, which is all nothing but fake profiles and all those stuff that is happening on a day-to-day basis. Then impersonation using computer resource comes under 66D. So cheating by impersonation is nothing but you are not, let's say you're not Anita, but you go on a particular forum and say that you are Anita and you try to defame her name, then that is impersonation. Then violation of privacy is nothing but if someone doesn't want you to see something and you see it without their permission, without gaining their actual consent, then that comes under violation of privacy. So basically a sharing of private content, or your photo, even if it is very normal photo taken in a very studio environment, but you still do not want that particular photo to be sent out to anyone, then that is violation of privacy. Cyber terrorism is a huge debatable concept wherein there is no clear distinction as of now whether talking against the running sitting government comes under the concept of cyber terrorism, or is it all about talking about the whole country in general. So this is a debatable topic. Do make a note of it. Then you have section 67. It is publishing and transmitting of obscene content on the internet. Then you have transmission of material depicting children and then sexual act. Then it comes under 67B. It may not be photographs. It might be even a cartoon picture that you have downloaded, like they call it a headk. So if it was that particular material, then it is also objectable. It is punishable with imprisonment. Then there is a concept of 67C wherein companies are bound to retain and preserve the information. As I was talking about Facebook and Google, unable to maintain data the more than 3 months. Then you have powers of interception. The powers of interception is a very interesting topic, which most people would have been cautiously looking forward in the last 2 weeks. Then you have issued to, power to issue directions for blocking public access. 69A, most of the pornographic websites that you see on a day-to-day basis would be blocked because of this orders of 69A. Then you have powers to authorize to monitor and collect traffic data. This is 69B. This 69B and 69 are interoperable because of one thing, which is nothing but Pegasus. So this is a debatable topic as of now, whether Pegasus was legal or illegal. From a government standpoint, Pegasus is legal because they wanted to monitor people who might commit crime on a near-to-day basis. Question is whether that particular authorization was given in a writing or was it a verbal authorization. If it was a verbal authorization with any personal intent, then it is a clear case of crime. If it was not in written authorization, but it was done without any personal interest, then it is not a crime. But with the list of people that has been placed in the list, let's say journalist, and even the lady staff who was helping the previous Chief Justice of India was also on the list of Pegasus snooping. So now the question is really whether this particular matter is with regard to how do you put it? Whether it is regard to issuance of directions under 69, or is it about with regard to matters pertaining to 69B. The question is whether in what relation they have given the particular authorization to get the content over, or what was the actual intent of getting the matter initiated in the first place. Then you have the concept of unauthorized access to protected system. So here protected system doesn't mean any computer that has a password. It also means an IoT device or even a wireless camera that you try to break in and try to gain access to it. It also comes under the concept of unauthorized access of a protected system. Then you have the penalty for misrepresentation. So if you misrepresent, saying that if you try to sell something that is not genuine, or if you try to say that you have something but it is in reality you don't have a particular matter, then that is pure misrepresentation, and it is a penal offense under section 71 of IT Act. Then you have breach of confidentiality and privacy, which again talks to the concept of whatever conversations that you have in private, you do it under the pretext that you believe it to be true, that you're talking to someone in confidence. But if they record it with your knowledge, or if they share that information to third party without your knowledge, then that is breach of confidentiality and privacy. Then publishing of false digital signature certificates is a crime under 73. Digital signature certificates might be something new for most of the people over here, but once you come out of your college and go into the world of paying taxes, digital signature is a big bummer, wherein even if you go to an income tax department or any government office and say that I am Satyanarayan or whatever it is, but another person comes with your digital signature that you have already obtained and say that I am Satyanarayan, then he will be Satyanarayan and I'll not be Satya. So that is the level of credibility that is being given to digital signature right now. So it is going to be a huge uprise in the requirement with regard to all digital spaces of e-governance. Then publication of fraudulent for the purpose of fraudulent purposes, you publish some information with the sole intent of causing financial loss, then it is a crime under section 74. I've already talked about Pegasus in general, and this is section 69, which gives the power to intercept any communication whatsoever without the knowledge of the end user. So this covers most of the, let's say, acts of Pegasus, sovereignty or the integrity of India. So Now the Modi government can very clearly say, no, I wanted to save my country from the opposite party who was trying to collude with China or whatever it is. Then what happens? They can bring it into the concept of powers of interception. Then for the purpose of defense of India, for the purpose of security of a state, for friendly relationship with the foreign countries, you are doing it. Or there is a public order or prevention of incitement of a commission of an offense, then for investigation of any of the offense before said. So in general, if they can prove that they did it with the purpose of saving the sorry face of India, then it comes under the powers of interception. So the government cannot be held responsible for Pegasus. That is what I'm trying to say. So Section 79 and 79A of the Information Technology Act gives an exemption from the liability of the intermediaries. So how do I put it? Let me give it in the form of an analogy. Let's say that there is 100 rupees from your friend's pocket and you don't have any money with you, but your friend is slightly asleep. You take that 100 rupees and keep it within your pocket. But your friend finds that particular, wakes up and finds that 100 rupees in your pocket. Then he can very clearly say that you have stolen it from him. But instead, what you do, you steal that 100 rupees, but don't keep it in your pocket, but go and put it under ATM machine or in your savings deposit. Now the money is with the bank. You have stolen it. But when the person wakes up and finds that the money is gone, but he knows that let's say that there is a GPS tracker to the 2000 rupees note that was being rumored. So with the GPS, he finds that it is within the bank. Can he go and give a complaint to the bank saying that this particular money was stolen? No. He can maybe, because the bank is an intermediary. The same concept is applicable over here, Facebook, Google, or any intermediary in general has to be covered under the provisions of 79 and 79A, wherein they are exempted from any storage of material that are of, let's say, incriminating material. So they will not be held liable for any material that is being stored there. Only the end user will be liable for the content that is being stored. So when I say data or content that is being stored, it might be a photo or a video or a text or a Facebook post or a tweet or any data related to that is being posted on the internet. Okay. This 79A is the harboring factor wherein Indian government is asking to appoint a nodal authority for each and every person. When I say a person, I mean a corporate person, a company, to appoint a nodal officer in case they want to get the harbor under intermediary. Now Google is saying, no, I am not an intermediary. I will not appoint a nodal officer because I am just a search engine. So what Indian government is now saying, oh, okay, you're saying that you're not an intermediary, then okay. Then I will take you liable for any content that is being available on your website. Because you're not an intermediary. That is what you claim. So whatever content is on your website, I will make sure that you're liable for that particular activity. So again, there is multiple IPC sections that are available, but this might be a little boring for you, I believe. So what I can do is I can send a copy of this PDF, PPT as a PDF to your faculty. Maybe you can get a copy from them if at all it is required. But in general, that I have mentioned each and every IPC section with regard to cybercrime. So that, when we are going and filing a case, we do not be a layman without knowing the law. You should know the law, and you can go to the police station and very, how do you put it, very sarcastically say to them that, I know the law, this is the point, this is the act in which you are supposed to file the case. So, they will be baffled by your knowledge. So that is the reason for me giving you this particular intimation. So threatening messages by email is covered under 503 IPC. Word gestures act intended to the insult of modesty of a woman, it is 509. Defamatory message, any sexual conversation or whatever it is 499 IPC. Bogus websites, cyber frauds, cybercrime activities that happen on a general basis, it is 420, and that is normal fraud. Then email spoofing. You're getting an email saying that it is your friend, but it is not actually not your friend, but someone else who has interpreted that particular account details, and you have incurred a loss. Then it comes to 643 IPC. Then you have webjacking, email abuse, punishment for criminal intimidation. Then you have a copyright infringement, offense of infringement of copyright, theft of a computer hardware, and everything. So some of the famous cases, Techie gets 1 year jail for hacking BSNL broadband. So he was trying to alter the particular database of BSNL broadband. I mean, now we are all gifted with the concept of unlimited data, both in your mobile phone and in your internet. I mean, home broadband. But when we basically started using internet, when I was, let's say, in my 7th grade or 8th grade, I had to start using internet with a dial-up modem, and you will get the dial-up modem sound. You will have to connect to through an landline. There will be a call that is being placed through the modem, and that is how the data would get transmitted and everything. So there was a data limit that you can only transfer 300 MB in a month, or you can only use 10 GB per month given by Bharat, BSNL, in the form of a data one or whatever it is. So in 2010, one techie, he tried to alter the database of BSNL broadband and get unlimited data. So he was given 1 year jail and a punishment of 5,000 rupees for trying to make that case. That was one of the very few first cases that was reported with regard to proper, genuine cybercrime. Then 23-year-old uploaded data to force the college to put exam marks. So what he basically did is he started publishing multiple data to force the college to put exam marks in such a way that, he started publishing all their NAC committee papers, reports, whatever material that they have hid. He started posting it online, and it became a very huge issue. Then Tampa Teen and the 2 others arrested for Twitter Bitcoin hack. So this was back in 2020, wherein even Elon Musk was basically involved, wherein multiple accounts were being hacked, and donation was sought through Bitcoin, and it was posted in many prominent people's Instagram account, and there was a huge sum of amount that was being lost. So as the saying goes, it is not privacy versus safety, it is privacy and safety. It's a quote that I took basically from Netflix. It is an amazing series. If people have watched it, they would appreciate it. If not, please do watch it. You have an English subtitle to that particular series. It will be amazing. Coming to the last concept of reporting of crime in general. Now, with regard to reporting of crime, what by default the law prescribes that you are supposed to get in touch with police in case of any crime. So let me talk it from a negative aspect, then go to a positive aspect. In a negative aspect, let's say that you are a victim of a particular crime. A crime has happened to you. Now what you try to do is you try to go to the police and report the matter, but they don't give the matter in writing, and they try to delay you or whatever it is. 6 months down the lane, when you go back to the police station, they'll ask you, do you have a FIR or do you have a CSR? Do you have a copy of the complaint that you have given? Now, if you don't have any of these, then as per police, the crime has never happened. Another example is, let's say that someone is trying to create a fake profile of you, or someone is trying to publish your private photos or whatever it is, but he is someone who's known to you. But you think that, it is good to give him a warning and not to take a legal action. He stops the particular activity for the particular time. But 1 year later, he comes back with more photos and all those contents. Now you go to the police and say that, sir, I want to file a complaint. He has done it already last year. He's a repeated offender. Now police will ask you, did you report that particular matter to the police? Was that particular matter registered? Do you have a copy of the complaint? Do you have a CSR or whatever it is? But when you don't have it, as per law, the crime never happened. So now the question is whether to register the case or not to register the case. One of the very common misconception in regard to police in general is, if I go to police, they will tarnish my name. They will call my family. My name will be spoiled within the community. This is a common misconception which used to prevail on an earlier time. But now that notion of getting your name spoiled is no more applicable, because both the law enforcement and also from the government's perspective, they are giving due care for women, children, and also normal crimes in general, more importance in making sure that the reportability goes up. Let's say that 5 years back down the lane, what used to happen is they will not register a complaint, or they will not get you an acknowledgement for the complaint, because whenever a crime is committed and whenever an FIR is registered, what basically happens is they register an FIR. Monthly once they go and sit with the district magistrate, that is the collector, or with the assistant commissioner for a monthly review meeting. So what basically they ask is, in Hyderabad, the crime level has gone up. So many FIRs are registered. Now I'm going to get called from the Honorable Chief Minister, and he's going to blast me because the crime rate in Hyderabad has gone up. Now you have to take some action upon this. So police, what they will do, they will not control the crime. They will control the reporting of crime. So what will happen? You go and give a complaint, they will not register the complaint. They will try to use all delay tactics, whatever is possible. Just like how you would delay submitting that final assignment that you were due almost 2 months back. So likewise, police, what they will do, they will not register the FIR, and the case will keep on prolonging. And when the next incident really happens, there is no acknowledgement for the first complaint. So there was always a tug of war. Now what has happened is, now the government has given clear instruction in such a way that you do not have to bring this particular chart numbers down. If you try to do the particular activity, we will take serious action. So now what they have done, Ministry of Home Affairs, along with MIETY, that is Ministry of Information Technology and Electronics, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. What they have done, they have come up with multiple portals, let's say cybercrime.gov.in, and they have come up with the toll-free number 155260. And what you can do is, you can report this particular incident on the internet from a phone, from the convenience of the home, and register the complaint and get it done. Now this is all about reporting of crime. So here what happens, police has no other option but to get this particular complaint registered or give you an acknowledgement saying that you have given a complaint. So what happens if an incident happens and you report it and you get an acknowledgement number, you don't have to inform the opposite party or the accused person that you are actually registered a complaint. But even if you want to give him a symbol of good faith or whatever it is, and if he repeats it again the next time, you will have a reference number already saying that I've already reported this matter, he is in a repeated offender. Then the police will actually take up a serious action. So that is the simplest way of doing things. The harder way of doing it is making a written complaint by going to the police station, either by post or directly walking into the police station and reporting the particular matter. So am I discouraging you from going to the police station or giving a written complaint? Absolutely not. I am legally not doing anything of that sort. But you need to have a clear distinction of yourself, of the offense, and you have to segregate whether it is a casual crime. When I mean casual, I am not making it normalizing it. I mean to say that normal activities that are not creating much of harm to you. Then there is heinous crime. Heinous crime is basically any crime involving crime or a murder, or let's say a sexual assault or whatever it is. So you have to categorize into these two. If it is a casual crime, I would highly advise you to report it on cybercrime. and a toll-free number, so that it officially you get an acknowledgement on hand on the very next minute you make a complaint, even though the process is slow through the portal, because from the cybercrime.gov portal it has to go to MIETY. They will send it to Ministry of Home Affairs. Ministry of Home Affairs will categorize whether it should go to National Commission for Women or National Commission for Children, or should it go for let's say a normal police station. Likewise, they do make certain accommodations with regard to the nature of crime and everything. So you will get a call at least a week later saying that, sir, I got a complaint from NCW or Child Welfare Committee saying that, this particular activity is happening, and I want you to come in and make sure that you give a written statement, and that complaint will go on in a normal manner. If it is a heinous crime, directly go to the police station. Do not wait for cybercrime or the toll-free number, because that is a just Namke Vasudev process. It is a slow process. It happens on its go. So you go directly to the police station, give them a written complaint, and make sure that, if possible, go with a written complaint and visit the police station in person. Most of the cases with which people normally has a presumption or assumption saying that, I'm going to the police station, work is not happening, but if an advocate accompanies me, I will get the work done. Is it genuinely true? The answer is no. 90% it is false. The reason being, the only factor that the advocate does properly is make sure that the accused factors are heard properly, and he formulates it into a proper written format and gives it at a written complaint, and make sure that you get an acknowledgement. This is what a lawyer who comes to a police station usually does. So there's no lifting the stone like Bahubali movie or whatever it is. There's no huge humongous effort that is being put in over here. The matter is very simple. Written complaint has to be presented and an acknowledgement should be received. So what are the two forms of acknowledgement that can be received? One is an FIR, another is an CSR. FIR is when police is convinced that the crime has actually happened, they will directly show an FIR. If they are not convinced that it is a matter that really requires an FIR, but you need an acknowledgement that the complaint has been filed, then you can go with an CSR. CSR is basically a community service record. It is just a diary entry of the police record saying that you have given a complaint, and it is referable at a later point of time. So you have to categorize based on your priority of the matter, whether you want to treat it as a casual crime or you want to treat it as a heinous crime. If it is a casual crime, go with cybercrime.gov, go to the toll-free number. If it is heinous crime, go with the written complaint. Make sure that you exit from the police station with the help of a CSR or an FIR. Mostly in metro cities like Hyderabad and in, let's say, Bangalore, they issue FIR in a normal fashion. You don't have to put much of a pressure and find influence or whatever it is. Maybe you might have to stay a day all around over there. But eventually you can get your work done at such good places like metro cities. But whereas in other places, you need to spend a couple of days going behind their tail and getting the work done. The reason is because there are multiple complaints that are being given by victims at an earlier stage, and almost 70% of the crimes are not either being carried forward, go through, or they are abandoned by the victims because they get into a compromise with the party. So police, what they normally try to do is they try to first accommodate you and try to find an amicable solution, and then go with the stupendous legal procedures that is required. But if no solution is reachable, then they give you an FIR. So basically, they are trying to find out if you are really interested in the matter or just you are doing it for the namesake. So that is with regard to reporting of crime. I think we have time somewhere around another half an hour, I believe. So if you have any questions, I'll be open to answer them. And thank you for your time. I hope it was informative. If at all you have any queries, you can get in touch with me. My username is Cyber Satya. So you can get in touch with me on many medias that is available, Instagram, Facebook, whatever it is. And you can shoot your questions. I'll be happy to answer. I give back the floor to the coordinator to proceed with the end of the session.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
Anyone is interested to post any question? Sir, I have a question from my side.
Sure, ma'am.
How can you differentiate your Information Security Act from the Cybercrime Act? Both are interrelated or both are different?
It goes to the concept. I mean, as I told you, there's no Cybercrime Act at all.
Okay.
So Information Technology Act 2000 was created with the intent of e-commerce website, ma'am. Okay. Then there was amendment made in 2008, then 2018 and all those. They started incorporating cyber law related materials into that.
Okay.
But whereas there's no act of cyber law by default, but there is a data privacy bill that is coming. There is an GDPR law that is available in the Europe and everything. So right now, any police station you go, even though it is a cyber crime, the matter that is available is of a criminal nature. They will try to incorporate it within the available provisions of IPC.
Okay, thank you, sir. There's a small request. The participants can unmute themselves and they can post a question. Anyone want to ask any question?
Yeah, I have a question. Actually, not a question. It's a point of discussion.
Yes.
Sir, we have experienced that there are so many gambling sites, yes, like Teen Patti and Rummy, and we are sitting in India, where I believe gambling is not allowed. But I am a user. I am playing some gambling game like Teen Patti or poker through a platform which is designed by some American company, and might be the server, the location of the server where actually the physical web pages or the website is hosted. Maybe it's in Malaysia or maybe in Singapore. So I think I'm not a law professional, but I think if I am not found at the crime scene, it means I cannot be a part of that crime occurred. So I'm in India where gambling is not allowed, but I'm doing it. And the country who is offering this platform where gambling is allowed, but in the virtual platform I'm doing it. And the actual platform, the service provider is from America, but the physical location of that software or maybe the web pages or the scripting, whatever, that belong to some other country where the data centers are cheaper in comparison to the other cities. So how these things are actually handled? Because I've seen once we open the Facebook or maybe some other Gmail or Yahoo sort of email service websites. So those advertisements are very much being broadcasted. Play Rummy, earn money, and that is. So how it is it legal or how it is? They are doing it in public. So that I wanted to actually. Can you put some light on it?
Definitely. So have you heard of the website called as Dream11?
No, not yet actually.
Okay, Dream11 is also another company working out of India. So basically what they do is they also do the same betting process like cricket games and football matches and whatever it is. So the legality between Dream11 and other third-party gambling websites is, let's forget the concept of Dream11 altogether. Any legal gambling and illegal gambling, the major difference is, as per the Indian laws, Indian norms, if it is a gambling, if it is a game of skill, any game that involves a concept of skill, then it will be construed as a legal act. Okay, if there is no skill involved, but it is a matter of pure luck, then it is considered as nothing but a matter of gambling. So in India, gambling by default is actually being prohibited because there is a concept of Public Gambling Act, wherein it was an act of 1867. It prohibited the concept of betting or gambling on the basis of luck. But there was an exemption that was being given, saying that if it is a game that involved a skill wherein if a person records the steps that is to be produced in that particular game, to win a particular activity, then that particular game is legal and it is not a gambling. So coming back to the basic definition, let's say that if it is a game like let's say a game of cards, there is a concept of you have to memorize what was the three previous cards being put in by the opponent player to decide whether he has a spade or he has a club, and what is the number that he might have. It is a skill that is required. So if there is a skill that is being required to play the game, then it is not a criminal activity. So it is considered illegal. The next question coming to the jurisdiction part, whether that particular website is running within India or out of India, it does not matter at all. Because you as an end user, you out of your own free will, using your money, what you are doing is so that you give your authorization to send the money and play the game. So basically, even though you are playing, the game is being conducted by someone of that particular jurisdiction. Let's say that if the game hoster is from Sri Lanka, the website is from Sri Lanka, the laws of Sri Lanka is governing, not the laws of India. So you can play there, it is not illegal. But whereas your banking services might have a limit, or they might have a constraint saying that betting websites, if you're sending money or if you're using the money to buy Bitcoin or Forex or whatever it is, then it is illegal. Then they might block your account. So it is purely how you use it and everything.
So can we call it it's a trick, or it's a kind of loophole which all these
no, it's not a trick at all.
actually,
It's not a trick at all. It's not a trick. It's purely a legal perspective.
it's like a quiz, you can say. In that case, it's a quiz, it's an inter-competition sort of thing.
Exactly. So if it knows skill, if you can memorize, see, if I'm pressing a button and if someone says if 10 comes, you're going to get $10,000, it is not a game of skill. But if you give me 10 numbers and you ask me to divide by, select even numbers that might be of a different combination, and if I'm able to apply some mind and get that particular money as a prize reward, then it is not a gambling. As simple as that.
Yeah, thank you so much.
No problem, brother.
So there is one question from Ayush Tiwari.
Yes.
How we can recover the money which has been stolen or a fraud has been happened to us? Is there any solution for this?
Yes. So if at all you know any solution, please do let me know, ma'am.
I don't have.
Because to be very frank, there are two concepts in this particular matter coming all together, ma'am. Let's say that the first question is whether is it worth going behind the lost money and spending the money? Point number one. Second thing is whether the person is findable. Two things. First thing is, let's say that a person has lost 500 rupees. Then he cannot go on. It doesn't really make it a concept to spend 2,000 rupees and find that 500 rupees.
Yes.
It is not economically feasible. But whereas a person has lost 50,000 rupees, what he can do is he can report the complaint. He can ask the police to send a 91 CRPC notice to the bank, wherein the bank will freeze the particular account and they will wait for a court order to refund the amount to the original borrower. There is a concept called of chargeback. So whenever any amount has come into a particular bank, the bank manager has the suyomoto permission to send back the particular amount to the original source, found to be, if it was found to be of a fraudulent in nature. But unfortunately, what happens is in most of this financial frauds is most of these fraudulent accounts would be somewhere in deep interior places of Bihar, Maharashtra, wherever it is possible. So over there, if there is a bank, there will be only one bank manager. There will be no staffs or whatsoever. So they will not have any records of KYC or whatever it is. So finding the actual person is a very painful task and a painstaking task. So if the money is really worth doing it, we can definitely do it. As I told you, 91 CRPs is one of the major provisions which police use to recover the money. Second thing is, let's say that a person has taken the money, like 5 lakh rupees, but you know that he is genuinely a person, but he has done that particular fraud. Then a criminal complaint can be lodged. If he has a property, we can attach and do it and everything. But the level of fraud that is happening right now, no one will be a genuine person holding their own account and doing the fraud. So it will basically be a dummy account operated by hundreds of people to commit that fraud. So catching hold of some person and taking some criminal liability or recovering the amount is next to impossible, frankly speaking. Maybe, yes, there are multiple cases wherein, we have very dedicated police officers who are running behind the cases and making sure the culprits are caught. Culprits are caught and brought to jail. What about the money that I have lost? There's no answer for that. So only way of preventing losses, preventing yourself from losing any further money.
Hope Ayush Tiwari has got the answer for his question.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. We had a nice, wonderful session. You
Please,
have shown us the different kinds of laws which we need to remember. And the
Yes.
takeaway point, what you said is the privacy and the safety. And one more thing, the data is the oil. Basically, people always talk about data, put on internet, put your photo on internet, do all
Yes.
these things. Now we know what is important, what is unimportant. So we need to categorize, then we have to come out
Yes.
with the solution before putting ourselves at a risk. That is
Exactly.
what I have understood from your session.
Precisely.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. The precious mind. Thank you, everyone.